the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Sid Mookerji of Silicon Road. Sid, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Good afternoon.
Great. So what was your background before investing in early stage companies? What did you do before this?
Well, I was an entrepreneur. I was the founder CEO of a company called SPI, Software Paradigms International. It was a company that did work for retailers, eCommerce, and CPG companies worldwide, custom application development, and also certain products that we had built for that sector, that industry. I ran the company for over 20 years, grew the company mostly using cash flow. And eventually, I had a CFO who said, you know what, I think we have an opportunity to get a great exit. And we went on a roadshow, and I sold my company, long story short, to a large strategic called Cognizant in 2018. And ever since, I've been working on this venture fund.
So what excites you right now?
Well, the venture fund that we founded earlier in 2019 is called Silicon Road. And Silicon Road is a fund, accelerator, and advisory group for innovation in retail, e-commerce, and CPG. If you haven't heard that retail is going through a crisis, then you probably have been asleep, I guess. So there is huge opportunity here in lots of different areas, and innovation is the crying need in this industry. So that really is one of my passions, one of my missions, I guess, in this phase 2 of my career, to kind of help build this innovation ecosystem for retail, to help enterprises, to help startups, to connect them all with research, et cetera, and build this great innovation ecosystem.
Well, great. So what's your advice for people investing in startups in the retail and commerce sector? What do you advise them to do before they write that check?
No different than what you'd look for in most other startups. Of course, it really helps to have somebody who understands the actual application, but mostly it is looking at the team, looking at the traction, looking at any existing customers, revenue, strategic partnerships, and so on and so forth. But I think in retail, there is a lot of opportunity. There is a lot of, what is referred to as blue ocean, right? So there is huge opportunity in just various aspects of it, starting from what's happening in a store or what's happening in a warehouse, to the supply chain itself, the last mile delivery of merchandise, and so on and so forth. So there is huge potential. There's lots of opportunity, and there are many areas in which retail startups have tremendous opportunity and scope. So I think the important thing is to find the right team and put as much money as you can behind it.
And so on the other side of that table, what's your advice for people running startups in this sector?
Well, I mean, if you have a startup in this sector, once again, it's very important to not just focus on only technology, which I see a lot of startups doing, or focusing only on a business idea without focusing on how it can be executed on. It's important to marry the two. Talk to people who will be using your technology. Make sure that you have done enough customer discovery to ensure that the product or service that you're developing is going to be relevant to that industry and going to be of enough importance to them for them to buy it, and basically build a great team around it.
Well, great. Well, let's talk about the retail commerce industry. How is the industry evolving, and what are the changes you see coming up? It seems like it's changing rapidly. What's your take on it?
Well, it's very interesting, right? So for the past few years, we have heard a lot about the demise of the brick-and-mortar retail industry. And by and large, that is true. Thousands and thousands of stores are shutting down every year. But here's the thing. People are actually buying more than what we did in the past. So even in this past year, retail sales went up significantly, about 3 to 4% compared to last year, which is huge, right? If you look at the numbers, trillions of dollars. However, the brick-and-mortar sales, in fact, fell probably, or were pretty much flat. E-commerce, on the other hand, went up by 15, 20%. So basically, it's not that people are not buying things. but it's that we are buying things differently. We start looking for merchandise on our phones or online, and then maybe go to a store to check out the merchandise. But if we don't get what we went to look for, we immediately pull out our phones and buy it from a website. So I think it's very important, if you're a retailer, to kind of think about how to kind of capture that customer that came into your store, or even attract them to your store in the first place. And if you're an e-commerce retailer, it's important to figure out how you can do the cross-selling, which again is a big problem with e-commerce. There are many other problems. So for instance, if you are an e-commerce retailer, it's very easy to figure out who came to your website, right? So it's using cookies and things like that, and what kind of merchandise was looked at. But if you are a brick and mortar retailer, that's very difficult to do. So to identify customer preferences, to figure out discarded shopping carts and who discarded that shopping cart in a real world example, brick and mortar situation is really, really difficult. So these are all opportunities for technology to kind of figure out. On the other hand, even as people are buying more and more things online or on their mobile phones, delivery is a big problem. I live in Atlanta and I work on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, which is a wonderful technology hub in the city. However, I mean, the most common sight is that one of the lanes on Peachtree Street, which is already very busy, occupied by delivery trucks every morning, every afternoon, every evening. So I think one of the challenges is, how do you solve that problem? And then, of course, there is the other corresponding problem of packages being stolen and things like that. So there are all these different aspects of evolving retail, which provide opportunities for startups as well as for retailers to innovate on.
So let's talk about your fund for a moment. What is your investment thesis for your strategic fund, and what startups fit that thesis?
So our fund is focused on kind of getting the right kind of innovation for retail. So it's a very simple thesis from that perspective. Our fund has retail e-commerce and CPG companies as our limited partners or investors. And so we talk to them and figure out what their priorities are. So it might be something like improving the in-store experience. So they might say, we want to find out who came into our store and what they came in for. All right. So there are gamification kind of startups that are trying to solve that problem, for instance. There are many that want to kind of get to the whole cashierless store situation where people come in, pick up whatever they need and leave, and they automatically get charged for it. So that's another aspect that is of interest. And so finally, so things like that, right? So our thesis is basically identifying the challenges that our LPs and our retail advisors are giving to us and going and finding solutions for that. And that, therefore, those startups can be in various stages. Of course, given the size of our fund, we are probably looking at seed or Series A kind of startups. And we are typically looking to do initially a smaller check and then follow it up with a larger check if there is traction with the startup and our retail limited partners.
Do you have one or two portfolio examples that you can call out as potential examples of what your fund looks for?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the startups that we have invested in is called Software Automation. So Software Automation is actually quite advanced. They're a Series B company startup, and they are basically completely automating the apparel manufacturing space, right? So they have robots for sewing, so call them sewbots. And basically, for example, the whole manufacturing process of a T-shirt is being automated, where you put in just cloth on one end and then a T-shirt comes out on the other. Huge promise, tons of IP, which is proprietary, Georgia Tech technology, and definitely very exciting for us. Another one that we have invested in does analytics for small and medium-sized retailers by putting a plugin on top of their POS systems. And essentially, these are all the mom and pop kind of retailers that do not have access to the very large ERP systems that large retailers have either built or bought. And so this gives them great visibility into who came to their stores, what they bought, and what is the merchandise that is the most popular right now with their clientele and what they're likely to run out of, et cetera, et cetera. So these are a couple. There are many, many more. One of the companies that, again, is in our portfolio is one that uses augmented reality to provide greater information about a product in a real store, right? So you go into a department store and you want to look at a perfume, for example, or your significant other wants to buy a handbag, and she can go and pick up that perfume, and automatically there is a lot of information about that product that appears on a big screen in front of you. That might include endorsement from celebrities. It can include usage methods. And this software, this product can be applied not just to obviously department stores, but also to things like pharmaceutical industry, where you walk into a store and the Johnson & Johnson is one of their customers, for example. So these are the two, the two or three that I'd like to call out.
So what are the challenges in this space for the startup? Where do you see startups spending their time mostly trying to overcome?
Yeah, in the retail e-commerce CPG industry, one of the big challenges has been that typically this industry has been a laggard in terms of adopting good technology, and that also includes this startup innovation and whatnot, right? So historically, they have stuck with their old methods. In my previous company, one of my largest customers, which also happens to be one of the largest department stores in the world, was using a database, for example. They were pretty much the only large company in the world using that database. Okay, and that database was, I think, 60 years old or something. So they just historically have not been quick adopters of technology, not very good at adopting change in general. And so the challenge here is not that that the startups are able to come up with solutions to some really significant problems. It's about almost kind of figuring out how to integrate that with the current operations of their customers or the retailers, e-commerce companies. And so it's change management really, which is the biggest challenge I think that they see from a customer perspective. And so therefore, again, their revenue growth has been delayed compared to many other industry segments because of that.
Well, are there any particular subsectors or applications you see as heating up and are good opportunities for investors to pursue right now?
There are several, and I mentioned a couple. So, for example, last mile delivery, for example, is a huge problem. And again, if there are ways to kind of innovate in trying to figure out how that last mile delivery can be achieved, especially for the smaller retailers, right? The bigger guys have their own fleets and contracts with large transportation companies, etc. But I think that's one big problem that needs to be solved. The other is in the space of just warehouse management. Warehouses historically had been built for really large-scale movement of merchandise between either vendors or manufacturers to the retailer, and then from the retailer to the stores. Now, as you probably obviously can guess, a lot of the merchandise moving out of the warehouses is happening for e-commerce purposes. So very small quantities are being shipped. So there are these huge, massive warehouses, and the process of kind of fulfilling individual orders is extremely inefficient. So there is a lot of opportunity there. And then finally, obviously in a store, like I said, there is opportunity in just improving the in-store customer experience. Not just people shouldn't be coming there only for buying merchandise, but it should also be for an experience which will kind of transform their life, right? So people are willing to pay $5 for coffee, obviously. It's because they also get a social experience along with it. And so retailers need to kind of think about how they can transform that. So once again, there is opportunity for retailers to take that on.
You mentioned AR a few moments ago. Do you think AR as a technology is ready to be a hot technology, or is it still coming and will be a bigger thing in the future?
It depends on the application itself. I think that 2020 is probably going to be a breakthrough year for AR. There is a lot of great startups that I'm seeing right now that have AR-based technologies, which actually have pretty good real-life applications. So I think the challenge with AR had been, this is great, but how does it apply to a real business? And so I'm seeing this in different areas. So one of them being, of course, like I described to you, how do you kind of talk better about your product, right? I mean, if you're within a store, how do you talk about your product and provide the same kind of information that a customer can get online? Okay, so I think AR has potential there. The other opportunity is to also provide guidance to customers within a large store or a large mall, for example. So I'm talking only about physical stores, right? So I think there's opportunity right there. And then thirdly, AR has huge applications in training. And so the way it applies to retail is if you are buying electronics, for example, or if you're buying furniture, the whole assembly process or the installation process is usually a challenge for many people because it's based on paper-based instructions and it's not always easy to follow, whereas AR can completely transform that. So there are many different applications within retail which can have a huge impact.
Very good. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, I think in general, there is huge opportunity within retail. Retailers, e-commerce companies, CPG companies, they all realize that, right? Many of them have tried to solve this in their own manner. So the really, really big guys, Walmart, for example, you probably have heard about Store 8. And there are many others like that. Amazon has famously spent billions of dollars every year on innovation. But there are many, many others. I mean, literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of retailers in the United States and outside that are looking for innovation. And so basically, my whole thing is that if you are a startup and if you have a great product idea, think about how it can apply to retail, because that's usually one thing that people don't think about. And it can really transform what you're doing within your startup.
Well, great. Well, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
The best way is to just contact me on email. It's Sid, S-I-D, at siliconroad.vc. Or definitely check me out on LinkedIn as well, or on Facebook. And I'll be happy to get back to you.
Great. We'll add those to the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.